In the twilight, when the last rays of the sun paint the dome of St. Peter's Basilica in a deep golden hue, and thousands of tourists leave the square, a different life begins within the massive walls of the world's smallest state. The silence enveloping the gardens and administrative buildings seems absolute, yet it is deceptive. In this place, where every stone is imbued with centuries of history and prayer, there exists a space not spoken of in guidebooks. This space is bounded not only by spiritual vows, but by very real steel doors and iron bars. Few pilgrims realize that just a few hundred meters from the altar, where solemn liturgies are performed, lies the smallest and, perhaps, the most unusual prison on the planet. It does not resemble harsh correctional facilities with high watchtowers and barbed wire. There are no endless corridors or hundreds of inmates here. Just 2 cells, hidden deep within the barracks of the Vatican gendarmerie, are intended for those whose actions have cast a shadow upon the Holy See. These walls have seen those who had access to the pontiff's most sacred secrets, and those who attempted to use these secrets for their own ends. Behind each door lies not just a crime, but a profound personal drama, a clash of faith and temptation, loyalty and betrayal. In a state whose ideology is built on forgiveness and mercy, the presence of a place of isolation seems a paradox. Yet it is precisely this paradox that allows for a better understanding of how power is structured in the heart of the Catholic world. To comprehend how this enclave, with its own court and place of incarceration, arose in the center of Rome, one must return to February 11th, 1929. It was then, in the Lateran Palace, that the historic agreements between the Holy See and the Italian government were signed. This document brought an end to a long period of uncertainty and hostility, transforming the Pope from a prisoner of the Vatican into the sovereign head of a recognized state. However, sovereignty is not merely privileges and diplomatic immunity. It is also a direct obligation to maintain order within one's territory. The Lateran Accords, in their 22nd article, clearly stipulated the rules of the game. The Vatican possesses full legal authority within its borders, but in exceptional cases, it can transfer justice into the hands of Italian authorities. This decision created a unique legal construct. On one hand, the Vatican relies on the Code of Pius Benedict and more modern canonical norms. On the other, it long utilized old Italian legislation from the late 19th century. Such an intertwining of eras and meanings led to the formation of a system on 44 hectares where crime is viewed not only as a violation of law, but as a profound moral fall. When the world faced new challenges at the beginning of the 21st century, the Vatican had to modernize its views on justice while preserving the archaic form of its execution. The 2 small cells became a symbol of this necessity. The state must be able to restrict the freedom of anyone who disturbs its peace, even if that person stood behind the Pope himself yesterday. The arrangement of these premises is striking in its simplicity and absence of typical prison harshness. These are small rooms that more closely resemble modest monastic cells, or rooms in an inexpensive guest house, were it not for the massive door with a peephole and the absence of a handle on the inside. Inside there is a bed, a desk, a closet for personal belongings, and a crucifix on the wall, the only silent witness to the repentance or bitterness of whoever is held there. A window, protected by bars, overlooks the inner courtyard of the barracks, where the footsteps of gendarmes and rare commands of officers can be heard. There are no exercise yards in the usual sense, no dining halls for inmates. Food is brought here from the gendarmerie's communal kitchen, and these are the same meals eaten by the defenders of order. Such closeness between guards and detainees creates a special atmosphere. In the Vatican, everyone knows each other by face, and yesterday's colleague in service or assistant in the chancellery can today find themselves on the other side of the lock. This places an enormous psychological burden on both sides. The gendarmes guarding these two cells are not just overseers, but people who are forced to combine the strictness of the regulations with Christian compassion. Throughout the history of the modern Vatican, these premises stood empty for decades, until a series of high-profile scandals forced justice to act decisively and quickly, bringing to light the shadows that had accumulated for years in the corridors of the Apostolic Palace. The most high-profile and painful case in the history of these walls was the story of the man they called Paoletto, Paolo Gabriele. For many years, he was Pope Benedict XVI's personal butler. His job was to be the pontiff's shadow, to hand him vestments, keep track of his schedule, and set the table. He was one of the few who belonged to the so-called papal family, a circle of the most trusted individuals who had unlimited access to the private chambers. But in 2012, this idol of loyalty collapsed. A leak of secret documents began, exposing internal conflicts in the Curia, financial machinations, and power struggles. The world came to know this as Vatileaks. When the investigation led gendarmes to Paolo Gabriele's apartment, located within the city-state, they were stunned. In the butler's ordinary dwelling, they found dozens of boxes with copies of secret letters, personal notes from the Pope, and classified documents. Gabriele was immediately taken into custody and placed in one of those very two cells. His motives were paradoxical. He sincerely believed that he was saving the Pope and the Church. In his own words, he saw evil and corruption around the pontiff and believed that by publicizing these secrets, he would cleanse the temple of defilement. This was a classic example of an internal conflict, where personal convictions came into direct contradiction with the law and duty of service. The trial of Paolo Gabriele became an unprecedented spectacle for the world press. The trial took place in a small hall of the Vatican Tribunal, where minor civil claims or issues of canon law are usually heard. The butler sat in the dock, maintaining the composure and dignity of a man convinced of his righteousness. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison. The time he spent in the gendarmerie cell was filled with silence and reading spiritual literature. This was a moment when all the grandeur of the Vatican shrunk to the size of one small room, where a man was left alone with his conscience and the consequences of his choice. Ultimately, Benedict XVI, following the tradition of mercy, personally visited his former assistant in prison and granted him forgiveness, after which Gabriele was released. However, before the echoes of the first scandal could subside, the prison walls again received residents. The second wave of revelations, dubbed Vatileaks II, was even more scandalous and convoluted. In 2015, a high-ranking Spanish priest, Monsignor Lucio Vallejo Balda, and a secular consultant, Francesca Ciauchi, were taken into custody. They were part of a commission to reform the Vatican's economic structures, created by Pope Francis. They were accused of providing journalists with a massive amount of data on financial abuses and resistance to reforms within the church bureaucracy. This case exposed other facets of the conflict, not only ideological, but also deeply personal. The relationship between Balda and Ciauchi resembled a thrilling novel, where ambition, fear of losing influence, and mutual accusations intertwined in an unbreakable knot. Monsignor Balda, being a clergyman, found himself in an extremely difficult position. His imprisonment in the gendarmerie cell was not only a physical restriction, but also a spiritual test. For a man of his status, prison became a place of profound humiliation. During the investigation, it was revealed that the methods of obtaining and transmitting information were far from selfless service to the truth. It was a complex game in which everyone pursued their own goals, and the prison cells became the final point of this dangerous route. During the trial, it became clear that the Vatican, as a modern state, faces threats that go beyond ordinary theft or espionage. Digital technologies intervened in the matter. One of those who passed through the temporary detention system was programmer Claudio Sciarpelletti. His case showed that modern secrets are stored not only in paper folders, but also on servers, and access to them can be obtained through computer hacks. This forced the Vatican to completely revise its security system, but the cells in the gendarmerie basement remained the same, reliable and unchangeable, ready to receive anyone who decides to encroach on the digital inviolability of the Holy See. The philosophical aspect of the existence of a prison in the Vatican deserves special attention. Here, two value systems clash. On the one hand, there is the legal necessity to punish misdeeds to maintain order and justice. On the other hand, there is the evangelical call to forgive enemies and turn the other cheek. How to combine handcuffs and rosaries? Vatican justice tries to find this balance through the concept of soul correction. Unlike ordinary prisons, where the goal is to isolate the criminal from society, here, being in a cell is seen as a forced period of solitude, conducive to realizing what has been done. This is a prison that strives to become a place of repentance. However, the practical side of the issue dictates its own rules. Maintaining its own full-fledged prison system for the Vatican is an economically and organizationally impractical task. That is why, in the case of serious criminal offenses such as bodily harm or large-scale theft, the Vatican most often turns to the Italian side. There is an agreement between the two states. The Vatican pays for the maintenance of the prisoner in an Italian prison, and Italy provides its infrastructure. This avoids the need to build huge prison blocks and hire hundreds of guards. The two cells in the gendarmerie remain only for elite offenders or for temporary detention of suspects during the trial. The Vatican Gendarmerie, which serves as the police and prison guard, is a unit with a rich history. It consists of highly qualified specialists trained in the best anti-terrorist and investigative centers in the world. Their task is to ensure the safety not only of the pontiff, but also of the legal system as a whole. When someone ends up in one of the two cells, the gendarmes become their only link to the outside world. They monitor the prisoner's health, provide them with necessary items, and ensure that the detention regime is not violated. This service requires special tact because the line between a criminal and a parishioner within these walls is very thin. It is interesting to consider the architectural context of these premises as well. They are located in that part of the Vatican which is closed to ordinary visitors. This is a high-security zone, housing administrative services and residential buildings for staff. The proximity to the papal gardens creates a stark contrast. On one side, blooming nature and fountains symbolizing paradise on earth. On the other, cold walls and iron bolts. This contrast constantly reminds the residents of the Vatican that even in the most sacred place, human nature remains unchanged, with all its weaknesses and propensities to error. The transformation of the perception of the Vatican prison has occurred in recent decades. If previously such facts were tried to be concealed, modern policies of openness compel the Holy See to be more transparent. The trials of Gabriele and Baldo were broadcast in the news, and journalists were allowed to be present in the courtroom. This became an important signal for the entire world. The Vatican is ready to answer for its internal problems according to the law, without hiding behind religious dogmas. The prison cells ceased to be a myth from conspiracy novels and became part of real legal practice. In the context of legal history, the Vatican prison is a unique relic and simultaneously a modern instrument. It shows how a small community can maintain its identity and sovereignty through the creation of its own mechanisms of coercion. It is important to understand that there are no professional criminals in the Vatican. Those who end up behind bars are almost always people from within the system, those who violated their oath of loyalty or professional ethics. This makes each case unique and deeply traumatic for the entire structure of the Church. The question of who might be the next occupant of these cells always remains open. In a world where financial flows are becoming increasingly complex and information wars are fierce, threats can come from an unexpected side. Vatican investigators are currently actively studying issues of cybersecurity and combating money laundering. Any suspicion of such acts could lead to the gendarmerie doors opening again for a new resident. The two cells are always in a state of readiness. They are clean, lit, and await their hour, reminding all inhabitants of the apostolic palace that earthly justice is inevitable. Considering cases where criminals were handed over to Italy, deep diplomatic work can be seen. For example, when an assassination attempt was made on Pope John Paul II in 1981, the shooter, Mehmet Ali Agca, was not held in the Vatican prison. Despite the crime occurring in St. Peter's Square, he was handed over to Italian justice. This was logical, as the Vatican did not possess the resources to hold a terrorist of such a level for decades. This example underscores the role of the two cells in the gendarmerie as a place for internal affairs that require silence and a special approach, while grave crimes against humanity are brought to a global level. It is also worth mentioning the psychological state of those who find themselves in these cells. Isolation in a place like the Vatican is perceived entirely differently than in an ordinary prison. Here, every bell strike, every prayer emanating from outside serves as a reminder of lost grace. For a religious person, this becomes a form of spiritual exile. It is said that prisoners often spent hours in prayer, trying to find justification for their actions or to sincerely repent. In such cases, the Vatican administration can provide a priest for confession, which once again emphasizes the dual nature of this place, legal and sacred. The culmination of any stay within these walls is the moment of truth, when the final verdict is pronounced. In the Vatican, there is no appeal system in the form common in secular states. A tribunal's decision can only be altered by a personal decree from the Pope. This places an enormous responsibility on the pontiff. He acts not only as a spiritual leader, but also as a supreme judge, capable of showing mercy where the law demands strictness. The history of Paolo Gabriele's pardon showed that in the Vatican, the last word always belongs to forgiveness. But this forgiveness only comes after a person has gone through the humility of a prison cell. The resonance generated by events in the Vatican prison extends far beyond the church walls. These are lessons for all humanity about how power and access to secrets are always fraught with enormous temptation. Gabriele's example teaches us that good intentions, not supported by respect for law and order, can lead to disaster. The story of Balda and Chauki reminds us that personal ambitions and intrigues can destroy even the noblest endeavors. These two cells are not just rooms with bars, but a mirror reflecting the vices and virtues of our time. Today, the Vatican prison continues to exist as a necessary element of statehood. It serves as a guarantor that in the heart of Catholicism, the law is one for all, regardless of rank or position. The lessons learned from scandals of past years have helped the Vatican become a more modern and secure state. But as long as human weakness exists, as long as there is room for betrayal and greed, these two cells will remain in demand. They are a silent reproach, and at the same time a hope that through punishment, redemption is possible. The world changes, technologies improve, but the foundations of the human soul remain the same. The Vatican prison, with its two cells, stands as a reminder that even in the shadow of St. Peter's Basilica, people remain human. And the next time you see the panorama of the Vatican, remember that behind these majestic facades lies not only the grandeur of spirit, but also the harsh reality of human justice, where the tourist route ends and restricted areas begin. Behind a heavy door in the silence of the gendarmerie barracks, history unfolds, hidden from prying eyes, but important for understanding how our world works. Concluding our journey into this hidden corner of the Holy See, we return to where we began, to the silence and twilight over Rome. The keys that lock these two cells are the same keys symbolically depicted on the Vatican coat of arms. Keys to the kingdom of heaven and keys to earthly power. In this combination lies the main secret of the smallest state. It must judge to have the right to forgive. It must imprison to show the way to freedom of spirit. The Vatican prison is not a place of despair, but a complex crossroads where law meets faith and crime meets the opportunity to start anew. Ultimately, the two cells in the depths of the small state are not about stones and bars. They are about you and me, about the boundaries we draw within ourselves, and about the responsibility for every choice made. The history of those who languished within these walls serves as an eternal reminder. There is no place so high that one cannot fall from it, and no abyss from which one cannot rise. This is the true meaning of justice under the dome of the great Basilica, where every evening the footsteps of the gendarmes fall silent and the lights in the cell windows go out, leaving the prisoners alone with God and their own souls. This story teaches us that even the most secure systems are vulnerable to the human factor. The Vatican, possessing immense spiritual authority, is forced to use entirely earthly methods for self-defense. This is an acknowledgement of the imperfection of the world and the necessity of rules that must be observed by all without exception. Two cells are not a sign of weakness, but a symbol of the strength of the law, which guards age-old traditions and modern stability. Looking at the Vatican through the prism of its prison, we see not just a religious center, but a living, complex organism that struggles with its ailments, overcomes crises, and strives for perfection. This is a path full of difficulties and paradoxes, but it is precisely this that makes the history of this place so captivating and instructive. And as long as the bells ring over St. Peter's Square, we know, somewhere there, behind thick walls, justice continues its invisible but extremely important work, guarding the peace of those who believe and guiding those who have stumbled. Ultimately, the existence of a prison in the Vatican emphasizes that the spiritual mission of the Church does not exempt it from the need to govern an earthly state according to all the rules of politics and law. This is a complex dance between the sacred and the secular, where two small cells in the gendarmerie barracks play their own, though invisible to most, but fundamental role. every completion of a sentence or act of pardon within these walls becomes a new page in the long chronicle of the city-state, reminding us that justice and mercy are two sides of the same coin, on which the face of St. Peter is minted. And as the world continues to change, this small corner of justice will remain an unchanging guardian of order in the very heart of the Christian world. The development of the justice system in the Vatican in recent years shows a desire for even greater integration with international standards. Strict laws against money laundering and the financing of terrorism have been adopted, which inevitably leads to a strengthening of the role of investigative bodies and, as a consequence, the potential use of prison facilities. This indicates that the Vatican does not live in isolation, but actively participates in global processes, facing the same threats as any other modern state. However, despite all the innovations, the spirit of this place remains the same. Punishment here is not the end of the road, but merely a difficult stage on the path to purification and the restoration of truth. When we look at photographs of Swiss guards in their bright uniforms or gendarmes in strict uniforms, we must remember that their service includes not only solemn parades, but also the hard work of guarding those very two cells. This is work hidden from camera lenses, requiring immense patience and psychological resilience. After all, every prisoner in the Vatican is a reminder that even the highest ideals can be betrayed, and that the protection of these ideals requires constant vigilance. Thus, the Vatican prison remains one of the most mysterious and at the same time one of the most honest places in the Vatican. It does not try to appear as something other than what it is, a place of temporary deprivation of liberty for the triumph of truth. And in this lies its main value for history and for modernity. It teaches us responsibility, reminding us that every action has consequences and that even in the holiest place on earth, the law remains the law.